Hello, I'm Carolyn Foote, a librarian at Westlake High School Library in Austin, Texas, and I'd like to talk with you today about ways you can create everyday advocacy for your library program, and also some ideas for advocacy when your library faces a crisis. But in part one, we'll be focusing on everyday ways to build advocacy into what you do. First of all, it's important to define what your library is all about. What is the core value of your library? And what do you want people to understand about your library and what it does for students? In their article, Things That Keep Us Up at Night, Joyce Valenza and Doug Johnson talked about the idea of branding your library and identifying what that core value is, and then giving your library almost a brand. And that's just what Buffy Hamilton, who presented earlier in the conference, did when she coined the term the unquiet library. It was a way to stamp her library with an identity that carries through all her materials and also the very essence of what her library is all about. It's important, once you've identified your core identity, your core program, is to create a presence in many different ways. And one way is to create a presence in your school in general, through programming for students, through your presence on committees, and through leadership activities in your school, becoming a very vital part of the culture of your school beyond the walls of the library. Of course, it's equally important to create a presence within your library that tells students and teachers what your program is all about. And it's really all about serving the students. Bringing in new technologies like the QR code we're displaying on the left in our library. Bringing in flexible spaces. Bringing in customer service oriented staff. All of those things help create a presence in your library that tells what your program is about. Everything from design to technology to instructional choices you make creates that presence. Another way to create a presence that advocates for your school is by training your own staff in frontline advocacy. Julie Tadero, a librarian at Austin Community College, speaks about this quite a bit, and the importance of training those people who are at the desk, whether it's volunteers, student aides, library assistants, and secretaries, training them on what your core beliefs are as a librarian in terms of how you want students to feel about your library program. And they're the face that the public sees. They're the face that people see when they walk in the door. So it's very important that what they represent is what you want them to represent. And that creates a positive goodwill with your students and teachers that is very important to advocacy. You also have to create a presence in your digital space, because our libraries aren't just physical spaces anymore, they're digital spaces as well. And there's many different ways to do this. One thing we did was take a look at our library webpage. I felt like our page was very static with links on it, but nothing much that the students can do, and it wasn't very reflective of Web 2.0 technologies. So we decided to turn our library webpage into a blog, which means we can post constant updates. We have polls on it, like the poll you see in the lower right hand corner about ebooks. We can change the tabs on the pages on top easily, and we have control over the content on the page. It's much more user-friendly and interactive for students, and that really appeals to them. And it creates a sense of community around the page while still providing them with materials and access to links and reference materials that they need. There are other ways to create a presence as well using other Web 2.0 sites. Flickr, for example. Sometimes it's just as easy to convey what your library is about is through images instead of through text or talking about the library. And so photographs can convey an idea to your community, your principal, your students, your parents about what's going on in your library and what type of library you have. It's also important to create a presence on social networks. Now, this can pose a difficulty in some schools because you may not have access during the school day to the social networking tool like Facebook or Twitter that you'd like to use. But this can still be done outside of school hours because students can still access it outside of school hours. And parents, of course, can access it as well as other community members. And it's a good way to display all the many activities going on in your library and make a very public face that portrays what your library is all about. It's also important to create a district presence for all the libraries in your district. And this is a larger PR effort, but it's equally important, especially when it comes to budgets. We created a blog for all our libraries in the district. We have 9 libraries in our district, so it's a combined blog representing all of our libraries, featuring stories from different libraries, sometimes featuring activities that all of us are participating in, and posting photographs of programming that we're doing. And it's something we can send out to principals, to the superintendent, to the community to show and tell what is happening in all of our libraries. It's also very important in addition to creating an online presence is to create an actual network for your communications. Using a site like Facebook or Twitter and building a network of both students and also influential people in your district gives you a communication network in case there were budget difficulties in the future. You would have a built-in set of advocates at the ready. And this is New Jersey's advocacy page on Facebook. It's also important to network with local businesses. I had the opportunity to hear the Spokane Moms, who are a group of moms from Spokane, Washington, who had a very successful lobbying effort in their state to fund libraries across their state with staffing. And one of the things they suggested was networking outside the school community, but with your local business community. And one idea I had for doing that was contacting business members in our community for quotations about what libraries have done for them, for their employees, and for their students if their students attended school in our school district. And then featuring those quotes in the sidebar of our district webpage to help demonstrate how businesses depend on the services that libraries provide. It's just important to tell your library story often and well. The slide is of an Animoto video that I created, again for all the libraries in the district, with images from all the different libraries. And it is a visual way of showing how vital and active all of our library programs are. And this is something we can send out in multiple ways to multiple groups like the teachers, the students, the principals, the superintendent, the community. And it's important to tell the library story wherever you can. One thing I think gets neglected is telling our library story to our political decision makers. We tell that story when we're in a crisis and when we want them to pay attention and understand what we do, but that's a pretty high expectation if we aren't communicating with them all the time about what our libraries do or inviting them to visit our libraries when they're in action so that they understand what we're doing with information literacy instruction and transliteracy and reading instruction and collaborative teaching. There's even simple little ways you can tell your library story that require very little time and effort. Julie Tadaro talks about using even your email signature as a way to communicate about your library. After hearing her talk in a webinar about library advocacy, I changed the signature line in my email, and it just says simply, serving 2,500 students daily. And that tells the reader that it's all about the students in our library and how many lives we touch on a daily basis. You can tell your library story through your data. Buffy Hamilton may have shared this in her presentation earlier, but some libraries are starting to create multimedia annual reports so that they're sharing their statistics, but in a document in a way that's accessible to both their principal and staff at their school, but beyond there as well, and telling the story visually as well as statistically. And you can find more of these multimedia annual reports on the Teacher Librarian Virtual Cafe website. A book that I found very helpful in thinking about how to tell our stories is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And when I say tell our stories, there's small and large ways that we tell our library stories. There's ways we tell our stories every day, and there's ways we network and communicate every day. But making sure that the stories we tell are the most effective ones is important. They have a set of principles that they recommend to make an idea stick in your mind, to make it simple, to make it unexpected, to make it concrete, to make it credible, to tie into emotion, and to tell stories. For example, keeping it simple. This slide to me is a perfect example. What if we conveyed our library mission statement this way? Bold, single word concepts rather than lengthy, wordy sentences. It's clear, crisp, concise, and to the point. And that's a way to make an idea sticky. Think of any Apple commercial, for example, where they try to portray their brand. Sweet, short, and to the point. Another thing the Heath brothers talk about is capitalizing on the unexpected idea in order to make the story stick. The unquiet librarian as a moniker for a library is a very sticky idea because it takes an expected idea of a quiet library and turns it on its head. This campaign that you're seeing here is the Geek the Library publicity campaign. And one way they turn the idea of geekiness on its head is using the word a little differently. And so they have a whole series of ads with what people geek or they love that one might not necessarily associate with libraries. But then in the ads, they explain how the library supports all these different interests. So again, it's creating an unexpected connection and using vivid language to tell a story. Another thing that's a good idea is actually using anecdotes to tell your stories. And our local community library, West Bank Community Library, in their local newsletter often include, after their statistics and list of calendar events, one anecdote that tells a story of how they had an interaction with one patron and how it turned out and how the library helped that patron. Those very specific stories, one at a time, paint a picture of what libraries are all about, and they're very effective. One other thing that Made to Stick talks about, which is very important when we're trying to advocate for our libraries, is the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is we already know what we already know, so it's very difficult to go out and communicate with others and remember that they don't carry the knowledge about our program that we carry. So we need to simplify the message. We need to convey it in a way that the layperson can understand what we're trying to say about what's important about information literacy instruction and services that libraries provide to students.